Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to the second in the Creators series of webinars, the first of which was with Councillor Peter John and focused on moving London out of lockdown. If you're interested, the on-demand version of that is now on our website, free to view. Today, we're looking more broadly. We're looking at discussing planning during lockdown and beyond. And I'm particularly delighted to welcome my new colleague and recently retired Chief Planner, Steve Quartermain, alongside a brilliant panel. My tech colleagues tell me we've got about 150 people online so far, so we'll crack on. But before I introduce our guest, just a bit of housekeeping. For those of you who don't know Creators, we're an agency with a real passion for local government, either via supporting the development industry as they engage with councils and communities and finding solutions for mutual benefit, or working directly for local authorities themselves. We do also operate a post-consent service, Creators Communities, and the idea of which is to turn housing estates into sustainable and desirable communities. So bring together existing and new residents, for example. Our work with and the belief in local government and local communities puts us in a very privileged position as a trusted partner, something we really embrace. Enough of that though, it's time to turn to today. The format's simple and will be very reminiscent of a traditional panel session for most of you. Steve will speak for around 8 to 10 minutes on the current situation and the immediate long-term priorities that the government, councils and the development industry need to be working towards. The panel will then have the chance to respond, and there'll be an opportunity for all of you to ask questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens or via Ask Creators on Twitter, hashtag Ask Creators, I should say. And we'll try and get through as many as we can, although judging by last time, we didn't get a chance to go through half as many as we would have liked. Your panelists for today then, you should see on your screen in reverse speaking order, they are Andrew Taylor. Andrew is Head of Planning at Countryside and well known to many in the development industry and far, far beyond, it turns out. He's also an active member of the RTPI, where he's a trustee and a General Assembly member and chair of the Management Committee at the National Planning Forum. He's also a Scout leader and unashamedly one of our very favourite clients. Karen Bradford, in blue, looking very glamorous, is the Chief Executive of South Kesteven. Karen took over the role 17 days before lockdown. I just can't believe how that would have happened. A bit of a baptism by fire. She moved across from being the Chief Executive of Gedling Borough Council. She's going to be telling us about the importance of planning and getting things back up and running and the challenges that councils face in doing so. And our final panellist today is Councillor Bridget Smith. After serving in a wide range of roles as a district councillor in South Cambridgeshire, Bridget became the leader of the Lib Dem group in 2014. Probably no surprise when the Lib Dems took a landslide victory in 2017. Alongside being a leader of that council, Bridget's a board member of the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority, the Lib Dem spokesperson on the LGA Safer and Stronger Community Boards, and the board's champion for antisocial behaviour. She's also on the members board for the District Council Network. We may get to local government reorganisation at some point. And finally, our main speaker today, the almost legendary former Chief Planner who presided over MHCLG for more than 12 years. In that time, Steve worked with, or at least saw off, 11 housing ministers, 4 of whom are now members of the Cabinet, or at least they are as of today. More importantly, he oversaw the transformation of the planning system with the formulation of the NPPF and its introduction. I think we're all quite familiar with that now. Steve also played a significant role in promoting the importance of the planning profession in government and outside, bringing more planners into the department, which I think is quite an important role. Like our other panellists, Steve has a local authority background, spending 20 years at Hambleton District Council, the last 12 of which were as a director, a role he combined with being the president of the Planning Officers Society and an active role in the RTPI. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Steve.
Thank you very much, Julian, and good morning, everybody, and good morning to everybody listening. I hope that everybody's coping. You're fortunate that the last week I've been enjoying the sunshine in my shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, but I decided that I'd put something more decent on today. But for many of you, it'll be the first time you see me not wearing a tie. So here's a first for lots of people. I think that I've been asked to give an overview of where we think we are, and I'm going to try and structure this in sort of short, medium, and long-term thinking. But mostly this is a start of a 10. I mean, I'm hoping that people have their own contributions to make during the discussion. Um, I think that if I can start in my 10 minutes to talk about the short term stuff, it's been everyone will know that short term coping with the immediate effects of lockdown, the government did some good stuff, very positive, doing everything from trying to address the shutdown of pubs, short term changes to PD rights, allowing takeaways. Issuing guidance on Section 106 on how to deal with SIL requirements that are coming forward, and allowing virtual committees. And it's quite interesting that a lot of these changes, which we might have been talking about for some time, that in a normal course of events might have taken much longer to come into being, suddenly happened. And I think, to be fair, it's commendable that we were able, while I was out at the time, we were able to do some things really quite quickly. Now, there's still some things to do, I think, which still fall into the short-term thinking, which is I still think that there are matters such as extending the life of planning permissions, which I know the government have said they're still looking at. But it's interesting that both in the guidance have been issued and some of the things that have arisen, there's still, it's very clear that the government's making in their guidance that the local government have got a role in this too. And I want to come back to when I talk about the more long-term thinking, is that there is an argument which I want us to think about in this webinar, in that you don't necessarily have to wait to be told to do something by government. I mean, local authorities have got the discretion to take some actions themselves. And certainly in things like enforcement of conditions and the like, you don't need to be told by government about whether or not that this is something you need to do in the short term, or whether or not you can take your own decisions without waiting to be told. And that's something which I think we can talk about as part of the webinar today. Now, anecdotally, you do hear that this isn't without its issues. The new technology is great, but I've heard stories about how planning committees are being run. Sometimes members have been using their iPads or whatever to have their committee agendas, and now, of course, they've got to have it to have their Zoom or team meetings, and so councils are suddenly having to print off agendas and all these sort of very sort of fine, detailed issues, all of which are resolvable. I don't think I've yet had a meeting, and today's proved the point as we were preparing to start the seminar. I haven't yet had a meeting where somebody hasn't said to somebody, "You're muted," because that is how people, the new technology, it needs getting used to, and this user sort of unfamiliarity with the new technology will change. And it's amazing how the idea of having a Zoom a webinar would have been something that many people would have not signed up to. But today I see, we have nearly 200 people in this seminar, and they can be seen as being much more efficient ways of talking to people, and there are real benefits. And that brings me to the third and final point on this particular issue, which is about public engagement. A lot of people have talked about this sort of approach and virtual meetings and the use of technology, sort of being difficult to ensure that people are still engaged with the process. And I think I recognise that challenge. But I also recognise the opportunity that that this gives for more people to be involved in the planning process who perhaps weren't involved before. So if you council that are having planning committees on a Wednesday afternoon, then quite frankly, there was only certain numbers of people who could turn up to that meeting. And having virtual meetings potentially should mean that more people can engage, whether they're working or with childcare issues. And I think that those are the opportunities that we should recognise and try and embrace. So although some of the short-term changes are arising, are giving solutions to an immediate problem, I think we need to recognise that some of these do have an opportunity to stay. And we shouldn't always assume that these are short-term solutions which are we're all going to go back to how things were before. And one of the points I want to leave on with for people to think about is the issue about the menu of options going forward. This isn't a binary issue. We won't just all go virtual, or we won't all go back to how we were before. This is an opportunity to have a menu of opportunities going forward. Medium term, I think the government's still got some things to think about, and I was watching a webinar quite recently when the government were on there trying to respond to some of the challenges and saying that they were monitoring it, they were thinking about it. I think they need to do more than that. They need to respond. I think in short term, in the medium term, there are issues such as the local housing needs standard and methodology of assessment. There's the impact of the housing delivery test and the numbers that are going to come out of that in a climate where construction sites have been closed. I think that the impact on 5-year land supply arguments are going to play out, and they're going to play out at every level. They're going to play out whether you're in a plan making mode, whether you're getting ready for examinations, you're getting ready to submit your plan. They're going to play out at planning applications, and they're going to play out at appeals. And so in the medium term, this needs to be more than thought about. This needs to be something which is the government needs to actually respond to and give a clearer position statement for the medium term. But perhaps I want to the real challenge for us as a group is to think about the long-term issues, and I want to sort of set a few thoughts here. I'm hoping that many people will have other thoughts in the part of the webinar. But my initial thoughts, it's a real question as to whether we will be able to use this as an opportunity to review the way in which we're planning for the future. I think that even if we find a situation where there is a vaccine or there's a way of dealing with this virus, what this virus has shown is how vulnerable the way we live our lives is to a virus like of this nature. So this is COVID-19, but my son, who is a doctor, tells me, well, there may well be a COVID-20 or a COVID-21 or whatever it is. And so we need to think about whether or not in what we're planning for is going forward can cope with something like this in the future. So there is an opportunity to think longer term. And I think that whilst I recognise that it's not just about housing numbers and how this is going to impact, there are broader issues which I think this gives us an opportunity to think about. I think that when we're looking about what sort of places that we're creating, there is an opportunity to really think about the sorts of open space and accessibility to open space that we're creating in the places that we're building. And this isn't just a reflection back on the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission's report about creating great places. This is a real issue about how people have been living in the last sort of 12, well, I suppose nearly 3-4 months now, about what that means for where people live. I think we cannot just assume that we can continue to maximise existing open spaces and build around them and assume people can use them. I live in East London, and I was cycling for my exercise at the weekend. I find myself going through Victoria Park, which is heaving. It was absolutely chocker. And all these people are there presumably because they don't have gardens or don't have open space in the proximity of where they live. The design of homes is an interesting point. If everybody's like me, is currently working from home, not everyone's home is designed and geared up for working from home, and we need to think about how that's going to operate. Whether or not we need to think about design standards and in terms of designing new homes is a good question. But equally, we need to think about, well, are we ever going to go back to that daily commute into central London with those offices that are there, that central business district notion that we grew up and all learned about in our planning schools? Whether or not there's going to be a change, and whether we're going to find that the way office space is used changes, and whether or not we need to think about local work hubs and the way the high streets operate. And I think that there are real opportunities for us to think about that. And what I mentioned, high streets. The high street is seriously challenged. We came into this lockdown period with a whole debate about how to maintain high streets. But is this an opportunity where we'll see high streets have something of a rejuvenation? Because if you're like me, I've been using my local high street much more than I ever used to before. It is the local shops, it is the local smaller shops that I've been using. And there may well be an opportunity for that to continue, and for the local shops to continue to offer a service which many people like me will continue to use in the future going forward. And so I think that we need to think about this, and I think that some of the issues around how those office spaces are going to be used, whether we need as much, whether we need to think about such provision being in the suburbs of the major cities and the like. And also, I suppose, many of you will know that I couldn't talk about this without making some brief reference to permitted development rights. If we're going to have permitted development rights, and they do have a role to play, then let's make sure that they are fit for purpose and deliver standards that people can live in. I have to say that and under the Office to Resi PD right, the smallest unit I ever saw, and I say unit because I like to refer to them as homes, not units, but the smallest unit I saw was 13.5 square meters. And if you hold up in a home that was 13.5 square meters for the last 4 months, you must be legitimately asking yourself, well, is this the sort of home that the planning system can deliver? And I would argue that it should be better than that. And that brings me back to the view about we need to think about how spaces work, and the public spaces, the open spaces, the way in which the cycling opportunities, the interconnectivity. If we're not going to commute, then we need to think about other ways of living our lives. And it won't all be, I have heard anecdotally, everyone's going to jump back in the car. I think they may do initially, but I think that ultimately that's not sustainable. And we will need to think about the impacts of a new way of planning can have on things like climate change. And we will have all seen how one of the few benefits that people talk about of the current lockdown is the way in which some of the climate change issues have been improved, and addressing air quality and the like has all been improved because people aren't traveling. And so there's a real opportunity here. And I suppose by way of conclusion, I come back to my point about we've all got a role to play in that. And I think that there's an issue for us to not necessarily have to wait for central government to tell us how to think. It comes back to that old Monty Python quote, what shall we think? Go away and think for yourselves. And I think that for many local authorities, they can think for themselves and think for what this means locally, and actually come up with solutions which are fit for the local economy. And this is an opportunity to think big on a local level. There, Julian, that's my thoughts to kick off the seminar.
Wow, Steve, thank you very much. I have to say, I don't envy the panelists in responding to all that. I mean, I've just noted down a couple: innovation, planning permissions, 5-year housing supply, high streets, permitted development rights, transport and air quality. And that was just the ones I caught. Bridget, I'm gonna leave you with that kind of hospital pass. Respond if for South Cambridgeshire and the Lib Dems more widely, if you will.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, what I'm going to say is going to be a bit of a rerun of what Steve said, which is relief to me because it makes me think I've got it right. So as the COVID crisis became reality, there was 3 priorities that rapidly emerged for us. Firstly was to ensure that the council could carry on with business as usual, meant sending everyone home, but fortunately we had all the tech already in place. Secondly, to work with partners to identify those thousands of residents who were potentially vulnerable. So not the shielded people, but all the rest who were vulnerable. And then to ensure that there were volunteer groups who were established, supported and resourced in every one of our 103 villages and one town, new town of Cambourne. And then to very rapidly start moving into plan for recovery with a major focus on business recovery. And we've been highly successful delivering on the first two, and we're well ahead of the game on the recovery phase, though we know it's going to be a marathon and not a sprint, and certainly not something that we can go alone. But I trust, we are being innovative and we are making decisions for ourselves. Now, we're fortunate at district council level that we actually have a number of key regulatory and statutory tools available to us, which will allow us to deliver at speed and in innovative ways. And also, we're very lucky to be so close to our communities. So we know our residents, we know our communities, we know our businesses, and we know our microeconomies. And at South Cambs, our aim is to facilitate a truly green business and community recovery, which captures all those environmental benefits, which Steve's already referenced, that have actually been a welcome consequence of lockdown, and actually to embed those in our future planning. But in attempting to do this, and in order to build in future resilience, because again, Steve has said, we could well have COVID 22, 25, 30, and so on and so forth. And certainly we know there's a link between climate change and pandemic. So this isn't going to be the last we see. Love to think it was. But this brings up a number of questions that we're going to have to really devote serious time to. Will we need more and better cycle and walkways to capture that modal shift so that more people can actually drive or walk to work? Do we need different styles of office and workspace now that we know that many people can and many people want to continue working from home? Do we need to design different types of public realm that allow people more space, but actually more opportunities to socialise and shop in the open air where actually it is healthier? Will there be far greater customer demand for housing which is proximal to work and recreation, to health and education facilities, and possibly outside of towns and cities? And will housing need to be redesigned to facilitate home working, as Steve's already said? And will the obesity agenda be far more significant in our spatial planning as its relationship to COVID becomes far more apparent? And will increased unemployment and reduced incomes increase demand for a wider variety of home ownership? And how will we deliver the very best digital infrastructure and connectivity to facilitate all these new ways of working? And we're all certainly suffering at times from that being as poor as it is. And how do we get construction moving fast? And how do I, in particular, fully exploit the potential of SMEs to play a significant part in this, particularly my local SMEs? And how do we capture through spatial planning improvements in air quality? And how do we build housing that's truly affordable to live in, rather than just focusing, as on the past, on housing that's affordable to buy? Because people aren't going to have as much money. So we have to think about their cost of living as well. So to do this, we need to be adaptable, flexible, and creative. We need to, we need not to wait, as Steve has said, for government to tell us to do stuff. But we do need government support, and we also need you in the private sector to share and embrace our vision. So we need government to remove the threat of the 5-year housing land supply, which will derail a planned recovery. And we must be allowed to extend current permissions so that the industry can accommodate new ways of working safely. And we need to be incentivized to build houses, and as councils allowed to borrow affordably to build our own housing. But I appeal to government, if there's anyone out there, to also remember that we have to continue to deliver our core services on an ever-depleting budget. And actually that recovery will be aided by us having enduring resources to deliver on our business as usual to the very highest of standards.
My turn to be on mute there. Thanks for Steve for pointing that out at the beginning. If you're not familiar with the technology. So thank you for that, Bridget. I mean, there's some very interesting stuff in there as well, and particularly challenges facing district councils. I'd like to flip that over to Karen. Obviously, South Kesteven is relatively new to you, but you were at Gedling before that, and I know somewhere else before that. What are the challenges facing you, and what do you need to address them, and what can planning and other things, other measures do to support you in the future and help get the economy going where you are?
Thanks, Julian. Yes, 35 years experience in local government, and probably the last 3 months has been the most challenging, without a doubt. 17 days in a new job as a chief exec of a local authority before we went into lockdown. So that brought immense challenges on top of our normal response, it's fair to say. Looking directly at the planning service and what we're doing as a local authority, we've maintained all our critical services, which extremely proud to be. 80,000 bins a week, housing services. So we've been in an excellent place for the last 3 months. Why has that happened? I think it's been fair to say that we've had strong political leadership throughout that period of time. And we've got some excellent staff that have been very responsive to the new challenges. And I think Steve mentioned it, Bridget mentioned it. We've got the new regulations around virtual meetings as well, which has helped immensely. However, we've gotten a local plan adopted in South Kesteven. It's going to be very challenging. It's 14,000 homes. It's ambitious levels of employment land development. And, how are we going to make that happen through this period of time? We've got over 600 staff, 400 of those are, working virtually or at home. And our planning committee, our council meetings are all acting virtually. So we've had a full council meeting, 55 councillors on a virtual Skype meeting for our council meeting, our first council meeting. We've had our first virtual planning committees. We have over 70 people on top of our planning members actually joined online, and I think I think everybody's watching each other to learn from each other, to see how it works, what we're learning. So for us, it is a steep learning curve with the new ways of working, but certainly our members have been exceedingly responsive, having training sessions, understanding new ways of working. Steve picked up about, we're on webinars, and we were used to doing it without papers, weren't we? We were getting very paperless in our approach. We're supporting our members to make sure they've got the paper again, so they're not having to have split screens on their iPads and their Surfaces. So lots that we're doing. However, I must make reference to the excellent leader that I've been working with, Councillor Kevin Cook. I know he's known politically. He's young, which he does remind me of now and again. I think it's fair to say. But to be able to work in this period of time with such an excellent advocate for local government has been really critical for me. He's been there. He's confident. He's engaging with businesses. Only yesterday he was doing a podcast on planning with a number of businesses, which has been fantastic. Officers and members have got a shared ambition for the district. It's ambitious. We want to bring forward development. And Callum and myself have been on a number of calls with different developers throughout this period of time who want to bring forward new investment into the district or move investment forward. You could ask me, well, what directly about planning? Our planners are all working virtually. As I said, they're very agile. Our work is continuing. What I'm looking for, though, going forward is a high-performing and focused planning service. And because of that, and you could think, why now, is we've started a planning review within this time. People must think I'm mad, or we're mad. But I think it's an opportunity to reframe how planning works going forward. And if we can do that by looking at the governance structures, the levels of delegations, how our planning committee works, I think this is critical to assist development, inward investment and developments coming forward. For me, 35 years experience, I've worked with planning services now for over 20 years. I'm not a planner. But I have worked with planning services, and I know that a high-performing planning service is fundamental to the whole council achieving its objectives. There's no doubt about that. How we work, the cultures, the behaviours, how we facilitate will take us forward, and even more so through this challenging time. So we've been in the responsive phase. We're starting to plan for the recovery phase. We've had over £50 million in grants from central government, and I think it's fair to say in supporting our businesses, we've got 84% of those out of the door already. We paid over 1,000 businesses within the first 24 hours of the grants coming in. We're understanding of the pressures out there with developers, with businesses, and we've got a significant role to play going forward.
Thank you, Karen. And just a note, we're having plenty of questions come in, so we'll get to those in a moment for those of you who've already asked. Thank you. Andrew, from the flip side of the coin, Countryside obviously operative in a lot of authorities. I'd be interested to hear your experience, and I mean, you also have a local authority background, so you know, what do you think you need to see, or where do you think things can be improved?
Thanks, Julian. Yeah, I was just going to reminisce over the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks or so to start with, really, and thinking the change that we've gone through as a company in relation to that. We furloughed about 70% of the staff, so overnight, you know, a lot of people disappeared. Obviously, everybody came off our construction sites, so we had to close those down. And then there was a period of looking about, well, how do we get back up and running? How do we change the way we operate to get back up and running as a house builder? And the focus for those few weeks for me was looking at the as operations on site, to increase them in the morning and the evening, to allow a phased start and end to the day, looking at increasing the welfare facilities on site, looking at, you know, all the signage across the site to make sure we could operate safely. And then talking to councils about those as operations and thinking about payments on Section 106s as a cash flow run business. As soon as things stop, you want to preserve the cash from the business. And just talking to those councils about the impact that things are having on us and therefore impact on the council. And I suppose my first thought is the vast difference in response from councils that we got. And some councils, it's so easy to talk to the chief executive or leader or the senior planning director, and to talk through those issues sensibly and rationally, and have some sort of letter of comfort in terms of as operation or whatever back within a couple of days. I'm still waiting 4 or 5 weeks later from some councils to actually have a response to my initial contact from email or letter, and that just shows the difference in response to local authorities. We've got 2 excellent authorities here on the panel with me, and neither of those were in my bad books, but it's quite important for developers to have that certainty and clarity. I just want to be able to talk to somebody. We're all in this strange boat at the moment, and I just need to be able to talk to somebody to have a sensible conversation and understand and discuss the way forward. But that does bring me on to one of my other points, which is actually about the investment in planning departments. If we are going to see a focus on house building in terms of getting the country moving again, if we are going to see a focus on planning in terms of delivering for employment and the infrastructure we need to be able to resource those departments appropriately. Now, whether that funding comes from an increase in planning fees, backed by an increase in that response, or whether it's from other funding, but ring fence those departments, I think, is critical to deliver. Yesterday, I was on a panel responding to the design quality unit idea from the Place Alliance. And it's not just about the numbers of houses or units, as Steve was talking about. It's actually ensuring that we have the quality homes with the open space, either individual gardens or the open space that people can get into and out of. And actually those local facilities, the creation of that new high street or parade of shops that Steve was referencing earlier within new developments, to make sure that people do have that walk, that 15-minute neighbourhood that's probably going to become much more important going forward if people aren't able to get out or looking at a much smaller geography around their home. Actually, there are some really positive things that have come out of this scenario. We've mentioned digital planning and the rapid transformation of that, being able to talk to people. I've had meetings where previously I'd have driven for 2 hours for an hour's meeting and then driven 2 hours back again. Well, I've saved quite a lot of my day and patience and carbon by just having a Zoom call for an hour, whatever it is, and that's positive. It's difficult in terms of human interaction, But some of those things we will get to use. And one of my team was shout out to Chelmsford City Council last night adopting their local plan over digital means. And my team member was saying it's great. I was able to sit at home and watch it, and then then I'm off straight away as opposed to having to travel back again. So there are some real positives in terms of some of these changes we're going through. I also find that, for some of those really good authorities, I'm much easier to be able to get to speak to case officers because they're at home, they've got perhaps more flexibility in some of their time, and actually that's really good as well, being able to have that dialogue with those authorities. But looking forward, what do we need? I think there's some questions referencing extensions of time for all current planning permissions. We need to get on and do that, or government do. Just like in Scotland, that's one of the questions that that just needs to be sorted now. He says very glibly, but we need to move forward also with other things. We've got problems with Fenian versus Welsh ministers in terms of the narrowing down of outline planning permissions and the ability to change number of entities and definitions. And I think we need to sort out some of those things to allow the flexibility to come back into the system to make sensible, pragmatic decisions. We need to move forward with a lot of public consultations. We need to get rid of the paper copy requirement for local plans and various statutory consultations. We've done it with EIAs, that's great. We just need to move it forward, because otherwise no local planning process will happen. And picking up another question on local plans, the debacle currently on anyone attempting to do a strategic plan needs to be resolved. We can't have a situation where 3 councils are supported by government through HIF Fund, through garden communities, and however many ministers involved in those decisions, however many millions of pounds that have been given, and it falls over at a late stage. And that sort of strategic planning is vitally important to overcome some of these duty to cooperate issue, housing number delivery, strategic planning in the proper sense. We've got a number of councils trying to do it, but so many seem to be falling over because of that long-term nature of the thought process, and you don't have that certainty at this stage of what's going to happen in 30 years' time. So some really short-term issues for me, some medium-terms, and then some really big issues that we need to try and resolve for that strategic planning to really work properly. Thanks, Julian.
Thanks, Andrew, and fascinating to hear from the other side. As I said, we're now on to 20-25 questions kind of running in, so a lot to get through, and I'm sure we'll get through as many as we can. I wanted to start though with something which was much more an issue just before we went into lockdown with Greta and her agenda, and Bridget, you touched on this in your response about the environmental benefits of lockdown and how we can actually bake that into the system, if it's actually possible, or how we can make the system flex so that we don't lose that kind of the gain we've made there. Do you want to start, and then we'll go around the rest of the panel?
Yes, so we just launched our zero carbon strategy the end of last week, which we're really going to be sort of hanging all our policy making on, and particularly planning. We're highly ambitious in South Cambridgeshire. When I took over control of the council, I said I wanted South Cambs to be the greenest district council in the country, and that's still my intention. The greenest district, not just the district council, the greenest district, and that's still my ambition. And we are restricted in what we can embed in our emerging local plan, which we're doing jointly with the city. There are limitations to what we're allowed to do with that at the moment, which I hope government will address. But a lot of this has to be done collaboratively with the major developers. So we're talking to the likes of Countryside about building housing which is built to the highest environmental standards, because apart from anything, I think this is going to be what the customer wants. And it's not just because people care about their carbon footprint, they actually care about their cost of living. So if we start to build housing that is built to the highest energy efficiency standards, which people can walk to their work or their recreation from, so they don't need to have a car, where you know, where we really have some control over their cost of living, that suddenly makes that housing much more attractive than something that's built in the middle of the countryside where you've got an hour and a half, you know, commute through congestion to get to work. And it's also, the whole of the climate change agenda is also inextricably linked with health and well-being, as has become, you know, very apparent in the last 2 months. So it's about working in, you know, we need government to really get on board with this. As a local authority, we really have to drive ambition, and we have to take our development partners with us to share that ambition, so that we are producing development which is sustainable in every sense of the word.
Thank you very much, Bridget. And Steve, from your perspective, from, you know, your perch at MHCLG or your previous perch at MHCLG, how much leeway is there within secondary legislation to do that? Because presumably primary legislation at the moment is off the cards. What rules need to be changed? Is it possible?
It's a combination. As I was saying earlier, some of this agenda can be taken forward by people like Bridget and Karen through their local plans and through their local policies. You don't need a different legislation a framework. You can see where people are doing it, and picking up on Andrew's comments, you know, there's always been some authorities that are better at this than others, and one of the challenges has always been to try and get that learning to cross-pollinate, for people to pick up the good practice and to apply it locally. But the one thing I did want to mention, I mean, is that we can talk about the new stuff, and it's important that we do, and talk about how we're planning for new places, new development. But equally, if I might say that there is a role for permitted development right to address some of the climate change challenges for retrofitting the existing stock. So, which is a real challenge for the country. So we need to be open to the fact that the conditions that might apply to some of the permitted development rights might well be the opportunity to address some of the climate change issues in terms of how that's applied in the future too.
Thank you. No, I think that's particularly interesting about retrofitting existing stock, because of course there's far more existing stock than will be new stock. Karen, how much of an issue is climate change in South Kesteven, and how, you know, have you had a chance to think about it yet? Probably not, I suspect.
Well, I've probably not had too much of a chance, to being fair, to speak about it over the last 87 days of being there. Not that I'm counting, but I'm sure I'm going to be held to my 100-day plan. Yeah, I mean, you know, climate change is going to be critical for us all going forward. Everything from air quality to quality of houses. We've had a study done by the Carbon Trust on the district, and now we've got to utilise those findings to develop a climate change strategy. And I understand that's already developing, and it'll be developing through one of our scrutiny committees going forward. But just picking up on just what a couple of the others were saying there, you know, I think Steve is right. A lot of what we're doing could actually be embedded already with the powers that we have as a local authority. I mean, the new regulations for virtual meetings are there till May 2021. You know, government has already given us that. So let's harness it and let's use it. You know, all my committee meetings in the new calendar of meetings will be virtual till at least the end of September. Planning committees are now going to be meeting every 2 weeks. You know, we're stopping all that travelling, which is really, really important. You know, how many authorities have got effective open space strategies? Open space management plans, you know, that can help when the applications do come in to drive that open space and that recreational space in what we're looking for. Let's be honest, quality of homes has been patchy, hasn't it, over the time. You know, there's nothing worse than going to stand in an estate where you could be anywhere, and the quality of homes have been low. In a previous authority, it was critical for our HRA, housing revenue accounts, this is our housing, social housing account, to develop passive houses, to develop straw houses, to develop high coded level homes. And we've got to get that into the industry as well as doing what we being advocates ourselves. So I think there's going to be a lot to do. You know, Steve's talked about cycling, walking. If you've been out cycling on the roads at the moment, it's fantastic, isn't it? You know, it's clean air, and you know, you're not going into the verge all the time. So I think lots to do. Has it been on my priority? Probably not for the last 80 odd days, but certainly something going forward. We're starting to review our local plan now, so we're at issues and options stage. So certainly the environmental impact has got to be key in there.
A great opportunity when you're reviewing your plan to embed all those measures.
Yeah.
Andrew, I'm sure Countryside has strong, I know that Countryside has very strong environmental credentials, so I'll let you say a little bit about that, but also I'd like you to talk a bit more about the strategic planning piece. We've had questions from Heather Pugh, David Locke, and Brian Horton about the North Essex garden communities, and I've seen you on LinkedIn. I know you have some views, and I'm sure Steve and Bridget and Karen will too, but if you could kick off, that would be great.
So briefly on sustainability points, I think from my perspective, it is key, and we're seeing it becoming more important for purchasers. They're making discernible choices in terms of the properties they buy and what they're looking for and asking for. The key for me, though, is we're not going to be able to do it piecemeal through each individual local authority in terms of setting those rules and regulations. What we need is a much more coherent approach, a consistent approach driven by government. From a developer's perspective, that's what we want. It's irrelevant slightly if the standards are this high or this high. Everyone's then on a level playing field, and everyone is approaching it from the same perspective. So when you're looking at sites, bidding on sites, you know what you're doing, and having that certainty early on in the process when you're looking at that and thinking about costs is really important. So a consistent approach across the country is what we need, even if those standards are pushed higher through, and preferably through building regs rather than planning, because that's a much better place for them to be. But that aspiration, that broader sustainability in terms of the walkable neighbourhoods, the open space, the mixed-use developments are exactly where we should be. In terms of strategic planning, I mean, I think we've got a number of authorities that are really trying across the country, whether that's in South Essex, whether that's in South West Hertfordshire, whether that was in the southwest down at Bristol, Bath and North East Somerset, or the ones we just had this week, North Essex. And they're really trying to make a difference. They're trying to push the boundaries in terms of the allocations and the new communities. And someone was mentioning Milton Keynes and the key decisions that were made in the past to make those things happen. And yeah, they might not have got everything right. They might not have got every single bit of evidence there. But for me, the ability to plan for that 30 plus years is going to be vital, to think sensibly about where we put our new housing, employment, infrastructure. And to be able to do that on a cross-council basis, thinking properly about the strategic infrastructure is just sensible. So we need to have a local plan examination process that is able to respond sensibly to that and get those things over the line.
Steve, I'm going to pass that straight to you, if I may.
A couple of things. I mean, let's pick up that last point first. I mean, the NPPF was changed last year to pick up the fact that some things go beyond the plan period, and the government did make a change to the NPPF to talk about how some of the large-scale ambitions go beyond the plan period. I think the North Essex, the Roger Clues letter to North Essex has highlighted the difficulties of getting this large-scale ambition through local plans. The issue about viability, deliverability, these are questions which the soundness test asks inspectors to address. And I suppose the government have responded to that to say, well, they recognise they need to look at this. Now, I've heard the debate, and I think that this will be a discussion which runs forward about whether it should be MPSs, whether it should be development corporations, or whether in fact we should actually look at the way in which the soundness test is applied to large-scale ambitious schemes, and whether there should be effectively two-stage test for some of the bigger stuff, where it's difficult to answer questions when you're dealing with financial implications which are sometimes beyond local authorities' ability to answer. And I think that the government's responding, and I saw that myself following North Essex, about saying, well, they recognise they might need to look at this, and I think that they do. I do feel though that my preference would be to review the local plan process and to see the soundness tests addressed. Although I development corporations a way of delivering rather than the policy side of things. I wanted just to remind everybody that before the lockdown, I mean, there is a white paper that was being proposed. I suspect that hasn't gone away. I'm not entirely sure it's about to pop out the woodwork anytime soon. But in that white paper, there will be some of the issues. It's been long presaged that the white paper promised to offer opportunity to look at some of these things. And when it does pop out, then I would urge people to remember that this sort of discussion we've been having in addressing some of the things that are in the white paper about how the planning system might need to deliver in the future. That will include issues such as the local plan process, how local plans are done, and also issues such as how local planning authorities, picking up some of the earlier comments from Bridget and Karen, how local planning authorities are resourced and how that money is spent. But also, finally, the digital agenda. It's interesting. I mean, I recognise that some of the issues and the opportunities that the digital agenda is bringing is great, but it's beyond just virtual meetings in my mind. Those are great, and we have a population which is growing through the system, which is much more familiar with the use of IT than, say, someone of my generation. But I think the opportunity is for digital to play its role in a wider planning across beyond local authorities. If you've got a digital base of data, then you can start to plan beyond the boundaries of your local authority, because that data is available to you, and you can start to model how things actually apply, and you could actually have more strategic planning without actually the need for a strategic plan necessarily, but you can do the planning beyond the boundaries of your authority. You can see the implications of what the infrastructure requirements are, what the economic and environmental impacts are going to be. So I think that the digital agenda is beyond just virtual meetings. I think it's an exciting time for planning. And I think that the white paper will give people an opportunity to return to that.
Thanks, Steve. And shameless plug, Creators has launched a new digital engagement service for all of those who want to carry on doing their consultations during the lockdown period. Bridget and Karen, do you want to have a quick chat about the strategic planning piece before we turn a bit to what Steve came on to in the latter part of that answer about the white paper and the opportunity to amend the system in that way?
So in South Cambridgeshire, you know, we're in quite an unusual position. We can't think of ourselves in isolation. We're part of Greater Cambridge, which is us in the city, and we have a Greater Cambridge City deal, which is doing well, has just passed its latest gateway review, and so there's another 400 million just being released into that. So obviously that's very sort of placemaking and infrastructure linked, but also we're part of the Oxcam ARC, and I'm the lead member on the environment for that. So we have to think of ourselves and our planning in terms of these much wider geographies, and that actually makes it very, very exciting. We're also, you know, it's a sort of pivotal point on the London Stansted corridor and the Norwich Tech corridor. So, you know, we've just got to be very mindful about our relationship, and I think there's enormous opportunities for us being a sort of test bed for new ways of delivery. And I'm very interested in new models of DevCos, you know, whatever they might look like, not as they were, but something new that fits the world we live in now, which will actually help facilitate delivery, but also facilitate our vision or aspiration for the sort of high quality sort of development that we want to see in our patch, but which could potentially roll out ARC-wide. Can't hear you, Julian.
On mute, Julian.
They
You're
are.
the worst offender, aren't you?
I'm struggling there. Sorry, I was caught reading questions there. Karen, I'll just pass that over to you to hide my embarrassment.
Yeah. I won't repeat anything what people have said, but I think that there's a couple of things. Yeah, it'd be good to see what comes out of the white paper, to see where the changes come and how we can embrace them. But as I keep coming back to, the role of the local authority is key in all of this. If you've got good advocates for planning, for change, for ambition, for growth, and you're willing to engage with that development and investment, that is what the role that we should be playing. The culture of the organisation is key to plan making being delivered. And you've all seen great plans that sit on shelves. What we need to do is to make those plans real and make sure that the delivery happens. And you're going to get that through having the right culture in the right organisation for me. If your political leadership and your senior leadership, senior officer leadership of an organisation is pro-planning, is pro-development, is open to looking at different joint ventures to enable that to happen, that's what's going to really make a difference for us coming out of this. Coming from response to recovery, to renewal, to resetting, whatever the agenda is, if you haven't got the right staff in the right place with the right cultures, it doesn't matter. The best plans in the world will not work. And for me, we've all heard it, culture, eats strategy for breakfast every day of the week. We've got to get the right skill sets with the right cultures to move this forward. Great, we need these new different frameworks, we need this to help us work, but let's get the culture right to make sure the place shaping and the ambition is delivered. As in South Kesteven at the moment, we are developing a huge site in a joint partnership with Burley Estates. I'm sure you've all heard Burley Horse Trials and the Burley House. We're working with a private developer to bring forward a significant development of housing, employment land, retirement village, bringing that forward. And we're still working through that, even through these times. Our consultation has all been online through Zoom, through with stakeholders, with members of the public. You've got to keep going, and you've got to be the facilitator, the enabler and the driver, or your plan will just sit there. So for me, it's about having the passion and the advocates to deliver.
We've only got really time for one short question, and unfortunately it's a very big topic. I'm just going to say high streets. I've mentioned it to all of you. Steve, I know you've got a view on high streets and you're an optimist, which is great. Obviously COVID has affected high streets, but there are opportunities as well.
Yeah, I think, well, I've always tried to be a glass half full person. I think it comes with the territory of being a planner. But I'm a realist as well. I think I'm not blind to the challenge that high streets face and the fact that there are still issues which to resolve. And to be fair, I think that we've yet to see the full impact of the economic impact of COVID. I think that we have more challenges to face in the high street. But you're right. I do think that there will be opportunities that arise from this, and we will start to do things in a slightly different way. And I'm particularly interested in the way in which Karen mentioned culture, the broader culture of society about what it now believes is acceptable and where it thinks it will operate. And I do think that there is an opportunity for us to rethink the idea that everyone needs to jump on a bus or a train and travel into a central area to work. There are opportunities there to see some of these economic benefits spread more widely. That said, I wouldn't want you to take away from this that I'm blind to the broader economic challenge, because I do recognise the high street still face a real a crisis in going forward, as do we all.
Thanks, Steve. And Bridget, various high streets for you?
Yes, so I mean, I was trying to remind a minister last week that even villages have high streets, and actually they're really, really important, because if they don't continue to exist, then everybody gets in their cars and drives off to a supermarket. And again, Steve referenced in his introduction how, you know, the small, you know, the corner shop, the village shops have actually been absolutely vital in our survival over the last 3 months. I'm a huge fan of Bill Grimsey. I would love to see Bill Grimsey's post-COVID vision for the high street. I think he's got it right, actually. He came to talk to my council and blew us all away.
Thanks, Bridget. We'll look him up and maybe for a future seminar. Karen.
Yeah, I think, you know, Bill's a fantastic advocate, isn't he, for the high street. What's one of his slogans? Bricks, not clicks. Trying to get us away to stop clicking on a website and actually go onto our high street. I think for me, certainly through COVID, one of the big things that I've been really, really surprised with is we took quite a lot of flack as a local authorities, because we maintained our markets. This is our open air markets, this is in our market towns, we've got 3 key markets. We came under a lot of flack to start with for maintaining these, but my goodness, has that changed now? The views of maintaining these markets, the footfall to them, the support for them is critical to the high street. So it was a tough decision that members took back. Do we suspend, do we not? Yeah, those local food markets have been critical, and more people are going. Footfall is increasing. Social distancing, you know, restrictions are in place, and support. So we've got a bid going in. It gets presented to Cabinet virtually on the 16th of June for a Future High Street Fund. We were one of the ones that went forward to the next round. So we've got a bid going forward for Grantham for £10 million to help support that high street, you know, to the renewal of the high street, shall we say. It's very much needed. But we are fortunate. We've got a wonderful town called Stamford. I'm sure it's one of the top market towns in the country. But they've got a lot of things right with Stamford. You know, they've got the balance right, they've got the pedestrianisation, they've got the independent shops, people walk, car parking is out of town, people walk in. It's got a fantastic market. So, you know, it's making sure that place shaping continues going forward to support those high streets.
Thank you. We're out of time technically, so I'll ask Andrew to be extremely brief. Andrew, building new high streets, is that something you found easy? You found challenging?
Yeah, just very briefly. I think when you're looking at large town communities, you have to have that range of facilities there. Looking at what you get there, the anchors now is obviously changing considerably. You're normally talking about, you know, 2 or 3 coffee shops, a small local Sainsbury's or Tesco's, something like that. And then, but other things like nurseries and an office space. And going back to what I said earlier about that 15-minute neighbourhood and the ability to have that range of facilities there. And if people are going to work at home, whether they want to work at home or in small office spaces nearby, you know, it's the ability for the new planning that we look at to be as flexible as possible to respond and be able to respond in the future as well, because things will never stand still.
Brilliant, thanks Andrew. So it leaves me to say thank you very much to all our panellists, and thank you very much to all our guests. If you found this interesting, our next one is with Chris Naylor on the 11th of June, same time. And Chris has just become the interim chief exec of Birmingham, and it'll be about the challenge that he faces. I think it became chief exec about the same time as you, Karen. So
yeah,
interesting times. And so thank you all again, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much indeed.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.